Hi, everybody. My name is Belinda Smith, and I'm from the Norfolk County Public Library. I'm here today to potentially introduce, or reintroduce and share our Norfolk Literary Prize writing contest and officially launch it here at Holy Trinity for 2025. The Norfolk Literary Prize is a writing contest open to all Norfolk County residents, ages 9 and up. There is no set theme or topic. You are able to write about whatever it is that you're passionate about, interested in, have something to say, whatever is kind of burning within you. We have 2 categories, poetry and short stories, and 3 age groups. Each participant is allowed to submit 2 entries per category. So, youth writers, if you write poetry, submit 2 poems. If you also write short story, or you just want to try short story, you can also submit 2 short stories. So you can submit up to 4 pieces of writing for an opportunity to win. Once an entry is submitted, it cannot be altered or withdrawn from the contest. Submissions are all typed documents. The word limit is 3,000, whether it's a poem or a short story. If it's over that 3,000 mark, it gets disqualified, so pay attention. The important thing is, when you are creating your document, which is probably on Word, do not put your name on your submission. Your name will be attached to your submission through the online form where you will submit it, which is all outlined on here. That's because we have a collection of judges who are teachers, retired teachers, journalists, writers, and other folks within the community who are qualified to judge all the pieces. Usually they have a category they're designated and then they judge. But it's all blind. They don't know who's writing their reading. They are just going by the criteria, which is included on the back of the entry details as well. So the deadline is always the 31st of July, so you have lots of time. We try to launch the contest somewhere near the beginning of the year to give a good solid few months, because ideally you'll be writing a submission specifically for the contest. That doesn't mean that you can't submit something you've written in the past. We just don't want it to be something that's either previously been published or anything like that. So July 31st, and then there's going to be a window of basically darkness where you're waiting to learn what is going to happen next. But all of the winners are announced at our award ceremony. We always host our award ceremony the first Friday of November. So that gives all of August, all of September, all of October, for not only our judges to read. If you can imagine, if we have 50 short stories that are 3,000 words each, that's going to take some time to read through and judge. And then we have our sponsorships, we get all of our things organized, we find a fabulous author to be our keynote speaker, and then we all get together and have kind of a red carpet literary event. Our Norfolk Literary Prize 2024 award ceremony was held on November 1st, and we had author Brooke Marley Jones join us, who delivered an exceptional speech, and it was really, I can't even say enough about it. The recording is up if anybody's interested in watching it. So let me just quickly introduce Brooke and then pass the mics over to her. So Brooke writes fairy tales and nightmares filled with tenderness and terror. Her stories take place in wild woods and Gothic buildings overgrown by roses and forgotten to the world. In this lifetime, Brooke resides in Niagara with her beautiful husband and 2 fluffy cats. So without further ado, please welcome Brooke Marley Jones to the podium thing.
So hello everyone, my name is Brooke. I write fantasy, horror, and romance under Brooke Marley Jones. And I'm here to talk to you a little bit about my writing journey and give you some insight into the world of publishing. And if you have any questions, just hold on to them and I will attempt to answer them at the end. So I'll just rip this Band-Aid off right away. I went to Hagersville Secondary School, and I'm not exactly what you call a sports person. No surprise there. I've got these nervous little rat claws and a slight stoop, but I seem to recall some competitiveness between the 2 schools. And it's interesting that I'm up here. And I don't say that to be smug, but rather to encourage some healthy competition. And I challenge you all to one day take this spot from me. That's a metaphor. You don't actually have to come take it from me. That's all I need in my career is a headline saying local author fights use for the microphone. But all jokes aside, I'd like to talk a little bit about how I came to be standing here today, and I figured I would start with my high school days. So I'm an author, and my passion is writing, and you're probably all thinking that my time in high school was filled with English courses, and you would be correct. And you're probably all assuming I did really well, right? Wrong. Grade 9 English mopped the floor with me. It had so many rules, and I was terrible at it. And I still remember one of my first assignments, I had to write a news article, and it was about this adorable little pygmy marmoset that was clutching someone's finger, and I failed it miserably. And it's been 20 years, and I still hate that little pygmy marmoset. And unfortunately, what I learned from that first real introduction to English was that I am not a good writer. And I internalized that. I am not a good writer. And despite that near failure and my continuing struggles with English, I still went on to take creative writing. And I had a wonderful teacher. You know, she was one of those teachers that you look at them and you just know they're doing exactly what they're supposed to be doing. And I did incredibly well in creative writing. In fact, I did so well that I prompted an interesting discussion with my aunt, who is also an English teacher, about the ethics of giving a student 110%. And even though I excelled at creative writing, I made up silly little justifications that it was different, that we were allowed to think outside the box and be artistic, and maybe even writers who aren't that good at writing might excel here. And I mean, I did, and I'm not even a good writer. In grade 12, I remember getting my first spare, and I don't know if you still call it that, but it's basically a free period with no class. And I was sitting in the cafeteria, and a teacher saw me, and he asked what I was doing, and I explained, you know, I have a spare. And he untucked his pencil from behind his ear, and he pointed at me, and he said, "You're going to get a credit for it." And then he just walked away. But that's how I accidentally came to be the editor for the newspaper and the yearbook. And at the time, I thought it was just pure coincidence. You know, he saw me milling about, and he needed a job done. And it didn't even cross my mind that he chose me because of my writing skills, because I wasn't a good writer. When it came time to graduate, I was sitting in the crowd while they were announcing names and awards, and I remember my friend Stephen was called, and one of our English teachers presented him with the English award. And I'm sure the entire audience went something like, "Oh yeah, that tracks, good job, Stephen." And it was my turn, and my name was called, and all of a sudden my creative writing teacher was on the stage, and she was presenting me with a second English award. Are you sure? Genuinely, in that moment, I remember thinking, but I'm not good in English, and I have bamboozled all these people. When post-secondary came around, I enrolled in psychology, but I still felt like I had this calling or this compulsion to write. So I decided to give English another go. And what do you think? Is this my hero moment? Is this where I finally learn I'm actually great at English and that grade 9 English class was just a fluke? Who thinks I did well? Hands up, who thinks I did well? Yeah, no, you're right, I did horrible. Fears confirmed and reaffirmed. I passed, but barely, and I thought, well, that solidifies it. I'm done taking these English courses because I am not a good writer. And again, just like high school, I took creative writing. I did fine. I didn't do spectacularly. And eventually, I graduated with my psychology degree, and surprise, surprise, I didn't go into psychology. I became the publishing assistant at a magazine, and when that started to slow down, I got a job at a library, and when I needed more hours, I started to work at a bookstore. And that was my life. I helped publish magazines. At the library, I'd spend all day recommending books that I loved, that I was passionate about, and at night, I'd go to the bookstore and I'd do the same thing, sell more books to people who loved books. And I was so close to getting the point. And it didn't take long for me to get tired of working 3 jobs. You know, I was exhausted, I was unhappy, And can anyone think of how I might have gotten out of working those 3 jobs? Any ideas? Yeah?
You won the lottery and
Yeah, no, I did not win the lottery. I got another job. I was hired in the library at Brock University, where I'd help students have access to books, and then ultimately I started buying books. And it wasn't until mid-COVID, when I was sitting in my gray-walled office with so many books piled so high that they might tumble over and crush me, that I realized I wasn't happy being book tangent anymore. I wanted to write my own book. And I had to shush that grade 9 English teacher, and I had to unsee all those horrible grades in university, and I had to stop thinking about that silly little marmoset, and I had to forget that I wasn't a good writer. What if I'm not good enough? What if people don't like it? What if I just start? My debut, The Forest Where the Phoenix Sleeps, released last June, and every day I'm reaching new milestones. Last month, one of the largest audiobook publishers in the world released my audiobook, and I was featured in the Globe and Mail as a fantasy book to get lost in, right below Brandon Sanderson. That never would have happened if I let a few poor grades stop me. If you have a passion for writing or art or anything, you don't stop, because the right people will see and appreciate that passion. You just need to find them. I spent 20 years ignoring what made me special because I let someone tell me I wasn't good enough. And in case you don't have a wonderful creative writing teacher or a strong support system, I'm here to say, don't ignore your passion because someone told you that you aren't good enough. All right, so now that the sappy inspiration is behind us, let's get into the useful bits. How do we write our book? Always have a notebook. Nowadays, a notebook might be the notes section in your phone, or if you're like me, you just message yourself and look like you're having both sides of a very unwell conversation. And anytime you're struck with inspiration, write it down. It can be a feeling or a quote or mannerisms for characterization or even song lyrics. Don't trust yourself to remember it, just write it down immediately. Consume as much media as you can. You never know when you're going to be inspired, whether it's a book or a poem or a movie. And I challenge you to always be thinking, how could I retell this my own way? Or how can I tell this story in a way that it hasn't been told before? No one has your exact frame of reference, and no one can tell a story the way that you can. This is your greatest strength. If you have a story that you love, even if it's been told 1,000 times, it still hasn't been told by you. And we humans like things that are familiar and comfortable. Do any of you watch the same movie or show over and over and over again? I do, over and over, Lord of the Rings, all the time. So suss out that formula that makes those things familiar and comfortable and use that to your advantage. Now, I know a lot of people, and especially writers, may not want to hear this, but in order to write a book, you actually have to sit down and write. It's easy to get trapped in the waiting for inspiration phase of writing. If you're really serious about it, you need to chase it rather than wait for it to come to you. Even if you're tired, even if you're not in the mood, you need to sit down and you need to make words happen. Some people have rituals to help them get in the zone, a particular spot to sit in, a certain type of meat or tea. For me, it's music. I have writing playlists, and the moment I turn them on, I'm daydreaming and crafting new ways to make my readers squirm. And speaking of making readers squirm, I wholeheartedly ascribe to the belief that more is more, especially when it comes to writing. I'm always asking myself, how can I make this bigger? Or I like to say, how can I give it more teeth? How can I make this scene leap off the page? I could say he jabbed his chest, or I could say he jabbed his chest with such force the finger bent and snapped. Sure, the first one is good. It gets a message across. That's fine. I don't care if it's believable. I just want to make you feel. I want you to wince and laugh and cry, and I can't do that with weak little sentences and cliches that don't make people feel anything. Okay, so I'm actually going to stop there and do a little activity, and then when we're done, I'm going to talk about drafting and support and criticism. And so I'll explain, do you have that first image? Yes, I'm ready for it. Yeah. Okay, so this is an exercise I like to call opposite opposite. So this is a small piece of a painting called Little Darlings by Omar Ryan. And what descriptors come to mind when you look at this creature? Yeah.
Absolutely terrifying.
Perfect, terrifying. And I saw another hand. Was there another hand back there? Nope, made it up. Okay, terrifying. That's good. Nasty. Okay, so what I want you to do is everybody think of 3 words to describe this guy, this little creature. And once you have your 3 words, I want you to think of 3 words that are opposite. You know, if you said terrifying, you might think cute. If you think nasty, you might think nice. And so basically, I want you to take a couple minutes, and I want you to make me feel those opposite words toward the monster. You know, you can tell me a story or a fact. Maybe he has a silly little British accent, or maybe he just broke his favorite teapot and he's very sad. Anything you can think of to convince me that that monster is the opposite of your initial thoughts. Do you want to flip to the actual full painting? Yeah, it's a cute little bowl, and it's got a girl hugging it.
Cute.
But yeah, he is cute. Yeah. So I'm going to bring us back, and I'm going to go back into some more book writing tips. So once the creative part is over, we're going to go into the painful part, and that is editing. And it's so easy to get bogged down by first drafts. You know, we've all been there where we've had this incredible idea in our head, and then when it meets paper, it's just not it. And I recommend getting as much of your story mapped out before you start editing too heavily, but that's not always realistic. I struggle with certain scenes because they're more fun, and I want to get them perfect, so I find myself rereading over and over and over. If it's starting to sound like a toddler wrote it, step away. If you're starting to be mean to yourself and you're starting to lose hope, just step away. And I promise when you come back later, it won't sound quite as bad. And when you get down on yourself, you need to have supportive friends. Find people and communities that pick you up and remind you to keep going. And remember them. You know, remember the friend who asked to read your story before it was published. And remember who talked you down from imposter syndrome. And remember the people who share your things on social media. And when the time comes, share their things too. Which brings me to the next point, be a supportive friend. Support art, even if you don't get it. Even if your friend wrote a story or a poem and you just don't get it, find a way to encourage them, because that's how you foster a supportive community. Be a supportive friend even if you're jealous. These awards coming up, maybe you really, really want to win, but when the time comes, your friend wins instead. Feeling jealous is perfectly healthy, and I know how much you want to say, I won, but I want you to feel just as good saying, my friend won. Good friends help one another, and if your friend goes on to do big and wonderful things, they'll remember who supported them. Right? We remember who supported us. Now, on your writing journey, some of the most difficult things you're going to encounter are criticism and people who just don't like what you create. You'll need to differentiate between those two things because they are different. Constructive criticism can be used to make you stronger, but there will be people who just don't like your writing, and that's just how the world is. I'm sorry, it's going to hurt, and there's nothing you can do to protect yourself from it. You just have to keep going. And remember, when you become an author, negative reviews are part of the job, and you now share that bond with a whole group of other people who all understand. For me, I can say that as time passes, I find I'm less attached to the work, and I can step back and look at it from a critic's perspective. I was listening to my audio book, and there are lines I hear, and I just cringe. But in my opinion, that's really a good thing, because it shows that you're growing and learning as an author. Now I want to move on to the publishing portion of this chat, and I just want to preface it by saying, if I haven't already convinced you, writing a book is hard. No one is going to make you do it. You're the boss. And if you're anything like me, that lady runs a really loose ship. So writing a book is hard. Publishing is harder. As an average reader who's just written something, I had no idea how this book in my hands gets to be a book in your hands. I'll warn you, the journey isn't for the faint-hearted. You can do it, but you have to want it. Whether you choose traditional or independent publishing, you have to be stubborn. The method of publishing that you're probably most familiar with is traditional. These are authors like Colleen Hoover and Rebecca Yarros who have been picked up by by publishing companies, and you'll see their books absolutely everywhere. When you hear the word author, this is probably exactly what you're picturing. The thing is, publishing traditionally isn't something you can just do. If you or I write a book, we can't approach a publishing company. Only a literary agent can do that, which means you need a literary agent. And as of 2025, the chances of landing a literary agent are about 1 in 6,000. That's 0.02%. And on top of those already staggering odds, your agent still has to convince a publishing company to take your book. When I finished my debut, I tried for 2 years, not 2 months, 2 years to get a literary agent. And the publishing industry is so overwhelmed with submissions. An agent in New York once requested my manuscript and then waited 2 years to reject me. At that point, I decided to publish my book myself, a process we call independent or indie publishing. And at the time, it did feel like a bit of a failure. There are some significant negatives to publishing that way. You have to be business savvy and good at marketing, because the only person who's going to sell that book is you. And you have to pay for everything out of pocket: editors, cover designers, formatters. However, the wonderful news is you get to choose who edits, designs, and formats your book. And for me, who is a bonkers control freak perfectionist, that was a nice trade-off. I'd rather have the stress of all the control than the stress of none of the control. With the indie route, you make more money per book. Traditional authors usually make around 10 to 15% per book, whereas indie authors can make up to 70% per book. Though, traditionally published authors are probably going to sell a lot more copies. However, that brings me to a controversial statistic that came from a Penguin Random House and Simon & Schuster antitrust trial a few years ago, which suggested that 66% of books from the top 10 publishers sold less than 1,000 copies over 52 weeks. And 15% of books from the top publishing houses sold less than 12 copies. Imagine beating the odds, getting an agent, getting the book deal, and you sell less than 12 copies. And you don't even own your book anymore because you sold it to the publishing house. So I'm going to leave it there. I could talk for hours about the publishing process, and encourage you to learn more about the route that's right for you. And again, I've been yapping a lot, so I'm going to switch to another activity here. Okay, so writing a book is hard, publishing is harder. But do you know what the hardest part of the whole process is? Writing a blurb. That little bit on the back of the book that condenses your entire wonderful story into 250 words. So what I want you to do is think of your favorite book or your favorite movie, and I want you to summarize it in one sentence and try and make it as entertaining as you can. I'll give you a couple examples. Woman who's tired of her grandpa starts questionably legal work camp for use in the middle of the desert. Does anybody know what that book is? Movie? Yeah? It is Holes. Man survives terrible illness and then fights bad guys while dancing to In Sync. Yeah, Deadpool. Yeah, it's Deadpool. Woman drops house on bystander and then steals her shoes. It's The Wizard of Oz. Okay, so take a couple minutes, think of your favorite thing, give me a one-liner for it.
The most relatable person imaginable is dropped into a world of magic and has to figure out how to survive with no instructions.
No, actually, that's my book. Sorry, I set you up there. Yeah, so I'm going to do a quick reading from my book, but I'm glad everyone played along with that activity. That was a lot more fun than writing a blurb, I think. But yeah, you guys seem to enjoy it, so I'm glad. Yeah, so I'm going to do a quick reading. So The Forest Where the Phoenix Sleeps is a portal fantasy in that it takes place on Earth, but the main character falls into this magical land. And in the scene I'll read to you, our character has woken up by the fire with a mysterious stranger who has dark hair and sad eyes. And our main character, Nell, is quite skeptical of the idea that she's woken up in a magical land filled with creatures who are ready to unalive her. And our stranger, Dara, is doing his best to hastily convince her that that is actually the truth. Next to the fire pit, Dara pulled on a lengthy forest green jacket, well worn and thin at the elbows. If he held still, I half expected him to lose him in the trees. Next, he rolled up the mat I'd slept on and shoved it in his bag. The mat, though much larger than the satchel, disappeared neatly inside. Pulling a length of cord from his wrist, Dara tied his hair in a half ponytail. I can show you why we must leave. He walked away, pausing to glance at me. Unless, of course, you'd like to save us the trouble and trust me, I'd love to see for myself. Dara's response was a squinty-eyed smile that said, of course you would. I followed Dara to a break in the trees. A brown flatland interspersed with dull shrubs and large gray rocks stretched before us. Against the far-off sky, white-tipped mountains jutted from the horizon. The view was spectacular, but mountains? I'd never seen a mountain range in my life. Where am I? In the middle of the plain grew a grove of trees, eerily green. The grove looked nothing like the brown shrubland around it. It reminded me of those old Scooby-Doo cartoons where the book that stood out on the shelf was always the key to a secret passageway. What am I looking at? I asked. Dara pointed to the grove. Is it behind the trees? No, it's not behind the trees, Dara replied hotly. Give it a moment. Nothing happened. Dara stiffened, his impatience palpable. Cupping his hands around his mouth, he shouted, "Hey!" My body tensed against the sudden shout. Still, nothing happened. Then, as if woken from a slumber, a ripple passed through the trees. At first, I might have dismissed it as a breeze, but one by one, the trees came to life. Dirt erupted as roots tore free from the ground. Slowly, the trees dragged themselves in our direction. We should leave, Dara tugged my arm, hastily. I don't understand, I resisted. The trees are walking? They're not trees, Dara said, pulling me away. The trees quickened. The entire grove scuttled forward like a giant centipede. As the distance between us lessened, I gave in to Dara's insistence. Without letting go of my arm, he pulled me into a run. We headed back into the wood, dodging trunks as we ran. From behind, Dara's voice shouted, "Hey!" again. I tried to look, but Dara yanked me ahead. It's mimicry. Do not stop running. If I were to construct a list entitled 100 things Eleanor Knoll is good at, you wouldn't find cardio on it. If I were to construct another list entitled 1,000 things Eleanor Knoll is good at, no, you still wouldn't see cardio. If Dara hadn't dragged me along after him, I surely would have fallen behind to be eaten. We hurtled through the wood, ducking under branches and avoiding thick trunks. Dara halted. A wide stream flowed at our feet. Booming crashes erupted as trees snapped and fell behind us. Yanking me close, Dara scooped my legs and swung my arm around his neck. He ran and leapt across mossy stones scattered throughout the stream. How he did it without falling, I'll never understand. We landed safely on the bank. Dara put me down and backed away. He started to apologize, but several loud thuds, like heavy logs hitting the dirt, snapped our attention back to the other side of the stream. The sparse riverbank was now dense with massive trees, which hadn't been there moments before. They stood on the bank like sentinels. I swore there were faces in the knots of their bark. So thank you for listening to me ramble. And if anyone has any questions about anything I've talked about or the publishing industry, feel free to ask them now.